Before he became Malcolm X, he was Malcolm Little. A boy who watched his home burn. A teenager whose dream was crushed by a single sentence. A young man who disappeared into crime, drugs, and prison. But inside that prison, he didn't just serve time. He rebuilt his mind. And when he walked out, he didn't just change his life. He challenged an entire system. This is the story of how a man went from street hustler to one of the most powerful voices of the 20th century. Malcolm Little was born on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska. But to understand Malcolm, you have to understand his father. Earl Little wasn't just a preacher. He was a follower of Marcus Garvey, a black nationalist who preached self-reliance, pride, and a return to African roots. This made Earl a target. White supremacist groups like the Black Legion saw men like him as dangerous. Their threats were not empty. The Little family was forced to move repeatedly. And then, one night, their house was set on fire. Authorities ruled it an accident. They often did. In 1931, Earl Little's body was found on streetcar tracks. His skull was crushed. The official report, accident. But Malcolm would later write that his family believed he was murdered by white supremacists. Insurance refused to pay. The family fell into poverty. Malcolm's mother, Louise, tried to hold everything together. But raising 8 children alone, under constant pressure and surveillance, broke her. She was eventually committed to a mental institution. Malcolm was just 13. His family was split apart into foster homes. This wasn't just poverty. It was systematic dismantling of a family. Malcolm was not an average student. He was sharp, focused, ambitious. In fact, he was one of the top students in his class. He told his teacher he wanted to become a lawyer. And the response came back. That's no realistic goal for a Negro. You should think about carpentry. This moment is critical. It wasn't just discouragement. It was a direct confrontation with institutional limitation. Malcolm later said this was the moment he began to disconnect from the system. Not because he lacked ability, but because he realized the system had no place for him. Malcolm moved to Boston, then Harlem. And Harlem in the 1940s was electric. Jazz clubs, gambling dens, street hustlers. This is where Malcolm became Detroit Red. Why red? Because of his reddish hair. He immersed himself in drug dealing, numbers running, illegal gambling, hustling and theft, working as a pimp and club worker. He wore flashy suits, straightened his hair to fit into a certain image, and fully embraced the street lifestyle. But beneath the surface, Malcolm was not at peace. He later described this period as living a life of self-degradation. He was surviving, but not fulfilled. And that tension matters, because transformation doesn't begin at rock bottom. It begins when a person recognizes rock bottom. In 1946, Malcolm was arrested for burglary. He was sentenced to 8 to 10 years. At first, prison hardened him. He was angry, defiant. Other inmates even nicknamed him Satan because of his hostility toward religion. Everything changed through exposure to books. A fellow inmate introduced him to reading seriously. Malcolm became obsessed. He read history, philosophy, religion, politics. But here's the detail that defines him. He copied the entire dictionary by hand. Page by page. Word by word. Why? Because he wanted power through language. He later said, "I never had been so truly free in my life." Think about that. A man in prison, feeling freer than he ever had outside. While in prison, Malcom was introduced to the Nation of Islam. Its teachings focused on black self-reliance, separation from white society, moral discipline, rejection of what they called slave names. Malcom embraced it fully. Why X? He dropped the name Little. Why? Because he believed it was a name imposed during slavery. The X represented lost African identity, unknown ancestral name, rejection of oppression. This wasn't symbolic alone. It was psychological rebirth. When Malcom was released in 1952, he was no longer Detroit Red. He was disciplined, focused, electrifying. Unlike Martin Luther King Jr., who preached nonviolence, Malcom's early message was more confrontational. He argued for self-defense, black pride, independence from oppressive systems. And people listened. Because he spoke with raw honesty. Remember the dictionary? This is where it paid off. Malcom could command attention, break down complex ideas, speak with precision and fire. He became the face of the Nation of Islam. But Malcom's mind didn't stop evolving. Tensions grew between him and the Nation of Islam. He began to question its leadership. This was the final turning point. In Mecca, Malcom witnessed something unexpected. People of all races, eating together, praying together, as equals. This challenged everything he had previously believed about race. After Mecca, Malcom's message changed. He no longer saw all white people as enemies. He began advocating for global human rights, unity across races, justice beyond nationalism. This evolution is often overlooked, but it's crucial. Malcom didn't just transform once. He transformed twice. Malcom knew he was being watched. Threats followed him constantly. On February 21, 1965, while preparing to speak in New York, he was shot multiple times. He died at 39. Malcolm X's life is not simple. It is not comfortable. It is not one-dimensional. It is a story of pain, anger, growth, intelligence, reinvention. From a broken childhood, to crime, to prison, to power. Malcolm X proved one thing. A man is not defined by where he begins, but by how far he is willing to transform. If you want more stories like this, raw, powerful, and deeply human, subscribe now. Because history is not just about the past. It's about understanding power.